Hi everyone, I am Shivajit Ganguly from NASCOM. Welcome you to this session. The continuing pandemic has impacted the workplace in terms of unprecedented levels of stress, trauma, emotional and psychological challenges. Ensuring that this, the emotional health and psychological safety of the workforce is today as critical for success as building the right team. Addressing this need, NASCOM, in association with NUVA, is proud to organize this special program, Mental Health in the Emerging World, featuring thought leaders in mental health domain. Today's discussion will provide much needed insights, guidance, and tips for us. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the panelist for the event. Dr. Viday Mishra is a professor of psychology at the Bhopal School of Social Sciences, a renowned academic and researcher. He is also a psychological counselor, corporate speaker, author of the popular book Everyday Psychology, an accomplished creative artist, musician, a former Indian cultural ambassador to United States. Welcome, Dr. Vinay. Next, Dr. Megna Srivastan is an academic, investigative, and counterterrorism psychologist. She is the founder of Varsity Consulting, a first office of its kind in India that provides legal psychological tools, training, consultations, and assistance to law enforcement agents, government, and national security bodies, and corporate security organizations. Welcome, Dr. Megna. Moderating the session is Mr. Avik Chandra, business advisor, columnist, and author of the best-selling book From Command to Empathy, Using EQ in the Age of Disruption. He is the CEO of Nuba, a NASCOM incubated startup disrupting behavioral assessment in workplace by leveraging the latest advancement in positive psychology. I now hand over the proceedings to Avik. Over to Avik now.
Shubhajit, thanks very much. A very warm welcome, very good evening to all of you viewers, and a very warm welcome to you both, Vinay and Meghna. Why don't we start this discussion by sort of predicating, contextualizing the conversation in terms of our present times? I think it suffices to say that over the last year and a half, much of the discourse around mental health in the workplace has kind of been equated to the trauma, to the bereavement, to the disruption that's been caused by the pandemic. Now, as a corollary of that, or the obverse of that same coin, is right now with numbers kind of under control, vaccinations at an all-time high, and the third wave still, thankfully, nowhere in sight, with signs that even if it were to appear, it would probably be less debilitating than what we imagined earlier. And I'm just speaking anecdotally, but what I get to hear certain people is because the pandemic is on the wane, because COVID is under control, by corollary, mental health issues and the need for mental health focus in the workplace is also on the wane. And I'd invite you right up front to sort of react or respond to that notion. Vinay, you want to go first?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Avik. And what a wonderful job NASCOM is doing by organizing this session on mental health. Let me begin with something very basic that kind of is quite a source of misunderstanding in the minds of several people. I mean, what exactly is mental health? Let's begin with that. So when we talk about mental health, we're basically talking about a state of well-being, which actually can be divided into four components. One of the components is that it's the individual who would get to realize his potential. So that's the first aspect that goes into making great mental health. The other thing would be related to coping with the stresses of everyday life. I mean, we do understand that there are these, daily hustles that all of us are surrounded by. also to be working productively and finally contributing to society, or maybe a community, would possibly set the ground for good mental health. A question that usually comes to the mind of people who may not really have a background in psychology has to do with the fact that why is it that it's impacting just a few people and why not the others, right? I mean, had it been something that big, it should have really been debilitating for practically all. But then you see a diverse kind of reaction here. And maybe, it's time that I explain it through a very simple analogy, which is called as the rubber band analogy. So I do have two rubber bands in my hand, and one is a poor quality rubber band that can actually be stretched to just this extent and no further than this. And there's another one which can actually be stretched to a much greater extent. So when we talk about the rubber band analogy and comparing it with human behavior, what we can draw as an inference here is that all of us are like rubber bands. Some of us are poor quality rubber bands, others are good quality rubber bands. But then there is an important factor at play. How much are we really being stretched? So the point here is that many people are already burdened by, let's say, family responsibilities, financial issues, occupational hazards, and things of that kind. And in that particular context, we find that the stretch on them is far greater than the other people. Also, their inherent stretchability might actually be on the lower side. And that's the reason why some of us get impacted by it so strongly and the others maybe at a lower level. However, what we really cannot ignore is that it has had its impact on the financial security aspect of practically, everyone. Unemployment rates we've all seen, the social isolation. So at the same time, there is this emotional and psychological challenges that people are faced with. Now, when we go through the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the health services, we find that 93% of the countries in the world have had a detrimental impact of the pandemic on mental health services. So if that be any indicator, it probably is pointing out at a already shaky mental health facility that is present to people the world around. Talking about India, let me tell you that according to the NIMHANS, which is the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences in Bangalore, it talks about 13.7% of the Indian population being impacted by a psychological disorder at some point of time in their life, right? And we're talking about 10.6% of people actually requiring services to an extent where it's an urgency, it's a requirement. Now, when we talk about this, let's also understand what a country can offer. You'd be very surprised to know that there are just 43 government institutes with only 26,000 beds dedicated to mental health cases or patients. And we're talking about a population which in July 2021 was 139.3 crores, right? So look at the health services that we offer and the emotional and the social price that we are paying for the pandemic. Even if you were to believe that or the pharmaceutical firms, you'd find that the kind of sales for antidepressants, for anti-anxiety medication, and for sleep-related medication, it's gone up significantly. So what I believe is that under these trying situations, the challenges of mental health would be many. And that we really, if we were to look at, the historical perspective, we can expect a long tail of the pandemic hanging over us for a considerable period of time.
Yeah. Meghna, your views?
Yeah, so I think, in my opinion, mental health as a construct and mental health issues have existed as long as humankind has existed, right? So a presence or an absence of a pandemic will make no difference to the presence of mental health issues, right? Um, what has happened during the pandemic is, for the first time, I think, in our existence, we've been locked up inside homes, and human beings are harmful to each other, right? Usually it's been maybe a bird or maybe eating something outside, that's kind of affected us. But this time we are staying away from people, and that's very unusual for the human species in general. We are social beings. So I think mental health as a construct came out now because we're not able to have the same kind of emotional connect or physical connect that we used to pre-pandemic, right? Um, I think we need to focus on how mental health as a construct has taken a back seat, not just in India, I think across the world, and it's coming out now in various forms, maybe because of the pandemic, maybe because of celebrity, going through mental health issues, or someone speaking of suicide, for example. Uh, and I think that's where this is taking a front seat now, and people are talking about this. So, to answer your question simply, I think irrespective of whether there's a pandemic or not, mental health issues will exist, right? Simply because the complexity of the world that we exist in is increasing day by day. And that will increase the stressors that we are surrounded by. The more the technology, the more the disconnect from human aspects, and the more need for people, getting the help that they need, probably for their anxieties, for other mental health related issues. The second thing that I want to bring into the limelight today is the difference between mental health and having a mental health issue, right? So if people can have physical health issues, people can also have mental health issues, right? It's as common sense as that, right? It's like if somebody comes and tells me, oh, but everything in your life is so great, you have a good job, you have everything going for you, why are you depressed? It's like, somebody asking, oh, there's so much air in the atmosphere, how do you have asthma? Right? Like, that's not how diseases work, that's not how disorders work, right? So there is some imbalance in your mind body that is causing whatever disruption that is happening to us. So irrespective of whether there's a pandemic, whether there's some other catastrophe, natural disaster, whatever we are dealing with, mental health is primary as physical health, and mental health issues will exist as commonplace as physical health issues exist today, right? Whether we are talking about stress related heart rate issue, heart related disorders, or stress related BP, or hypertension, diabetes, bad health in general, these things also add up to your mental health issues. And I think that is something we all need to understand generally, not just as psychologists, but just as people in general, just normalizing that mental health issues exist if people exist, right?
Yeah.
Just the way physical health issues exist. So yeah, I think I'm just going to stop with that.
Great. I want to take the conversation onto the workplace because we've been talking about work already. And again, ever since the pandemic began, and these kind of researches and reports and findings are continuing even today. I mean, my preliminary study shows that there are at least 5 or 6 sort of bodies or verticals of think tanks and analysts who are talking about behavioral competencies, or the psychological based, or the human centric competencies. I mean, the first bucket, when you think in terms of the economists, the World Economic Forum, the IMF, the ILO, the World Bank, they have their own set of findings and studies. Future of jobs that they've, WF publishes. The second vertical which talks about this and has been talking about it and publishing the reports is, the Gartners, the Forresters, the McKinseys, the Big Fours of the world. The third category is the human-centric or the HR-related firms, with the executive, search firms, the Russell Reynolds, the Korn Ferries, the Egon Zenders of the world. The fourth category, of course, because this is coming to the limelight, are people like yourselves, psychiatrists, psychologists, organizational psychologists, legal psychologists. And I think most disruptive of all is the last category, which is all manner of columnists and journalists and bloggers and self-styled sort of gurus and pundits who may or may not really be equipped to talk about it, but their well-intentioned outpourings have just and I think the sum total of all of this is completely overwhelming for the layman. For someone who's not researching this subject and who really wants to cut through the noise and understand at a very simple, elemental level, in this emergent workplace, in the workplace of the future, what are some of the behavioral competencies that are going to make me successful as a professional? No matter what my career path is, I might be a startup entrepreneur, I might be working in a multinational, I may have just joined my career, I may be mid-level, I may be the CXO of my company, right? What are some of these things? And I think if you could, shed some light on that, that'd be great for our viewers. Vinay, do you want to start with you?
Yeah. Yes, that's a very valid point made, Avik. And I think a good rule of the thumb here at this particular point is that we probably have to be prepared for a lot of emotions, right? And we should also be in a position to accept it as normal, right? There are lots of misconceptions that people would have, and I mean, that's what stigma is against several of these psychological disorders. So I guess that the pandemic really has opened people's awareness about the importance. And as Dr. Megna was also saying, that it has always existed, right? But the focus, the importance of it was probably not as well understood as we would have liked to as behavior professionals. So, I mean, mental health challenges show up in several ways. Most of the employees, and when we're talking about the work world here, basically feel, emotionally exhausted, and there's this increasing sadness, and there's a lot of data on depression related to that, or even, in very specific terms, increased irritability and things of that kind. So I guess anyone who really wants to combat it effectively should be someone who would be looking at the signs of deteriorating mental health. And I think that's where the managers need to come in, people who might probably be in charge of a smaller organization, or maybe even a larger one. They may not be experts, but they need to be aware, and they probably need to understand the possibility of referring such people to the right agencies. So here's where this awareness should begin with. I guess that when we talk about companies and the industry, we are also talking about the employee assistant programs, the EAPs, right? So being involved with the industry to some extent has brought me in touch with several companies which would probably do programs which may be entertainment based and which may probably be skill based. Well, it's probably time that we talk about mental health related issues at the workplace also, to kind of normalize it, to destigmatize it, and to get people to understand it in all its details. Also, I guess that as we are opening up, the pace of return to work really needs to be monitored. And I think opportunities such as, providing people rest of an adequate kind becomes really important. Also, respecting people's confidentiality while they report, their incapability to work would also be of great value here. And one of those things that at least one of the organizations that I've been involved with has started is that they have a mental resource hub, which has now become an integral part of their program. And it was amazing to actually even talk about smoking cessation at one of these places where they would invite people from different areas, and had a very sharp focus on keeping it heavy on the psychology side. So I guess these hubs would really do a good job if started in more organizations. I would also believe that mental health champions and ambassadors really can do a good job, because they are one of the regular people working in an organization, and that's where they would come in very handy in terms of helping people around. And absolutely, what is really important here is that some of these helpline numbers really need to be displayed very prominently. I mean, let's understand that there are just about 5,000 psychiatrists and about 2,500 clinical psychologists in this country. So, what do the others do? Where do they get help from? And it's time that we understand that even at the governmental level, and definitely at the NGO sector level, there have been many helplines, dial-in services, toll-free numbers that are available. And I think if those are prominently displayed, I mean, let's talk about the governmental program called Kiran, which is probably in 13 different languages and available 24 hours. So these are facilities that would help people integrate and channelize themselves back into their workspace with greater effectiveness. So that was the point about how mental health really can be improved, or people can be made to come to terms with certain difficulties. Each one of us have sort of had problems of our own kind, and would probably make a quicker adjustment back to work.
Great. Thanks for that, Vinay. Meghna, I'll just maybe preface the same question by putting out a bit of a, I wouldn't call it a laundry list, but it's a growing list. So you have things like, and these are clusters of attributes which are not necessarily unrelated to each other. So all the way from mindfulness to possessing the entrepreneurial spirit of agility and innovativeness and adaptability, to things like grit, resilience, and so forth, right? There's also been growing discourse around the fact, is it kosher for leaders of organizations to be able to come to terms with their own vulnerability? Should they even show their own vulnerability, etc.? So where do you stand with regard to these sort of attributes?
I think with the pandemic that we are still going through, one of the greatest life lessons I think humanity in general learned is we need to be extremely adaptable. So I think for us today and for the future of a good workspace, adaptability is one of the most prominent competency I think people of any level should have, whether it's like the leader of the organization, or the CXOs, or even just a team member. Right? I think all of us need to have this idea of adaptability. So what do I mean by adaptability? Right? I think adaptability directly affects a person's resilience, a person's ability to handle stress, a person's ability to deal with anything that comes in front of him, her, them. um, so the way we think about everything shouldn't be put in a box of sorts. We need to kind of think out of the box. So if we have a plan A and it didn't work because something happened, like the pandemic happened and businesses shut down, right? So right now, because of the way we are thinking about everything, we need to have plan B to Z, right? So we always need to kind of have fallback options, think of ways to handle stressors, anticipate things happening to us. So I think adaptability as a construct is very important for every individual to develop as a person. Because even if you think of mental health issues, right, a lot of people with maybe anxiety, or depression, or just people who are experiencing burnout, uh, they prefer to have a set trend of things, like something of like a routine to expect, something that is set in stone, that you wake up every day and do certain things a certain way, and people are used to that. But having dealt with the pandemic, I think one thing that we all are still learning is how we have to anticipate the worst and do our best, hope for the best, plan for the worst, right? So to answer your question, I think the one construct that I think holds everything together, all other competencies, behavioral competencies that is important for anyone in a workplace, would be adaptability.
Okay, great. So I hope the viewers got that, and that's a very key takeaway amongst others, because many times we think in terms of clusters of attributes, right? And what Megna you've just described is that there is something which holds the sort of kinesis, and from that, if that is then deepened, you can then spawn on to other kind of attributes also being nurtured and built over time. Great. Vinay, you mentioned the collaboration or the participation of psychologists or mental health practitioners with industry and companies institutionalizing mental hubs and so forth. We'll come to that towards the end of the program. I just wanted to shift the lens while keeping the industry and academia, that part together. I wanted to shift the lens to research. And just heuristically, me being a visiting faculty for certain institutes, my sense is that if it's general organizational behavior, if it's general assessing the agility of organizations, or talking about leadership skills and behavioral models, etc., not mental health, right? Which still suffers from that stigma. But as long as it's business and organization and focus and productivity, there's a fair bit of give and take. There's a fair bit of collaboration that's happening even now between academia and the industry. But if we're talking specifically about the mental health domain and problems, my sense is not enough is being done in India compared to how much it should be. So A, would you agree with that hypothesis? And B, if that's the case, how do we start to move the needle in the desired direction?
Fine. Absolutely, Avik, being involved in both these arenas as a college professor and also working with the industry, what I've seen over a period of time, particularly during the pandemic, is that the organizations are gradually opening up to the mental health aspect. And I say that with great uh, 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 understanding that it's not just about mindfulness that used to be an agenda with a company that I used to work with, or something like stress management or conflict resolution or team building, but it's come down to something very specific about parenting adolescents during the pandemic. I mean, how do you really deal with issues of that kind? And let's understand that we all have families to take care of. So some of these issues have really surfaced while people run into each other all the time at home and they're kind of locked up. I mean, in this particular situation, I don't think I was not aware of what it is to be locked up. And if my Antarctic expedition was to be of any reference here, I mean, we were locked up into that part of the world which no one visits. Right. So I've seen it all. And what is it to be really huddled into a room with 12 different expeditioners, for months together, and that too under fairly trying conditions. Coming back to the question, and having said that it's increasing, and wonderfully so, I must say that academics has a lot to benefit from this extremely priceless information that they would have access to while they collaborate with industry. And here's where, the new education policy really needs to be cited. The new education policy has now been implemented by just a few states in the country. The others are around the corner, but they eventually have to get down to implementing it. And that talks about the fact that just beyond the primary level, there would be a subject on, vocational aspects, right? In some ways, giving people an opportunity to have a peep into the work world. Also, at the college level, because I teach at a college which has a graduation and post-graduation classes, there are these internship programs that are highly valued. They were always valued, but the extent of emphasis that the new education policy places on the industry and academia collaboration is something that hasn't happened earlier in this country, at least. And therefore, what we can talk about is that some of these things really come in beautifully because it's the research part that finally percolates down to the industry to probably be taking some measures. And that's the reason why we have wellness experts, we have consultants being appointed who just may be able to help people in a manner that would make them more functional people at the place of work. So I believe it's a win-win situation for both. I believe that while there is greater collaboration between academics, research, and the industry and organizations, you would find it to be benefiting both these distinct areas in a significant manner.
And Vinay, I was just reminded of the national education policy that was published last year, as you were talking about it. It moves beyond the narrow confines of our traditional system. So, for example, it talks specifically about the urgent need to move to a more broader and more holistic, more comprehensive system of education and moving beyond STEM, for instance, right? So it's STEM plus, and talking about including humanities and philosophy does not, I don't think it specifically mentions psychology, but maybe that is something that needs to come in terms of broadening one's horizon, regardless of one's discipline. Meghna, I wanted to talk to you about something that you see around you all the time. I mean, you're in Bangalore. I mean, you have your own startup for SETI Consulting. Your brother has his own startup. You're a board advisor and mentor on a prominent startup. And all around you see Bangalore are startups and IT companies. And I say this specifically for self-interest of most of the audience members, right? Many of the people who are watching this today come from that startup world and come from the IT world, right? So this is specifically for them. When you look around you, and if you do a sort of a broad review of what you've seen the last year and a half and continue to see, what would you say is the overall state, if you would be, right? Broad strokes, mental health state across the ecosystem. And second, what are some of the telltale signs? What are some of the warning signs? So for a non-psychologist, for typically HR professionals, right? How would they know that something is going wrong? How would they even begin to know?
I think that's a very pertinent question. And like you said, like India has become like the hub of startups, and everyone seems to, use our country to the best of its capability in terms of starting something and building it up from the brick. I think I have two phrases come to mind when I think of startups and my experience working with them. One is peak stress, the other is peak performance, right? So basically, put these two things together, they work under peak stress to give peak performance, right? And that is consistently how things go for, I think, all startups, because they are crunching time. They're making sure things stay afloat. They have to make sure they please the investors. They have to make sure their employees are functional, but they're also crunched against time to make everything work so that the investor reinvests the next time they have to fundraise. Right? I think to keep all this afloat, the amount of stress never really dies down. It's kind of like an everyday state of mind, right? It's almost normal to be stressed, in a startup culture. And that's where like people like me come into picture and kind of burst that bubble saying, no, let's not normalize being stressed, right? Like, let's find a way to deal with this. So I think just being surrounded by people who are racing against time to keep their boats floating. I think one of the important things for everyone, even like founders of startups, to understand is without people, without functional people, without healthy people, no amount of excellence will keep something floating for long, right? So you can only be excellent when you're at your 100%, when you're very functional. So imagine having a fever and trying to work, right? You may not be able to give your 100% that day, but maybe sleep it off like a couple of days and then you'll be able to work better. So the question is it better to take 2 days off, come back at your 100%, or work at maybe 20-30% with fever and stretch it to 5 days, right? The same thing can be done in a much more efficient way if you're healthier. And the same thing holds good even for mental health, right? So that is something that I keep trying to find a way to bring into the startups that I have worked with and I am working with. So to answer the second part of your question in terms of what are the telltale signs of people dealing with mental health issues within startups, just simple things like if somebody comes and tells you I'm so burnt out, they're probably actually dealing with it, because a lot of people actually say these things. These words are very prominent now: burnout, I'm stressed out, I'm tired, like, oh my god, I can't wake up, or I have not slept enough, right? Simple things like this. Why aren't you sleeping enough? Why do you look so tired? Or more work related things like people maybe take more sick leaves than usual, or people are overworking, they're kind of staying back late at work. So maybe they could have finished their work in like 4 or 5 hours, but they couldn't and they're staying late. So why is it that work is getting dragged on? That is also a telltale sign of some form of burnout, some form of mental stress, right? So I think just look around you and try to understand that the other person you're working with is a person, right? And other than the work, there's like a whole part of life that exists beyond work, right? And a lot of things might be happening there that could be affecting this person's feeling of well-being, right? So simple things like maybe overworking, maybe too many leaves, or maybe just like lack of confidence in their work. So maybe people are not contributing, or people are underperforming. People who are actually very brilliant, very bright, very smart individuals are not able to perform, or are not able to bring out their ideas out into the open. They're feeling underconfident. They're feeling overwhelmed. Simple things like these are telltale signs of burnout, stress, anxiety, right? So yeah, I think that should
Great. Great. Yes, because very often, right, if you're in a particular milieu where you're working flat out as a CXO for like 13 hours, 14 hours, and you're expecting everybody to be able to do the same, sometimes it's very difficult to cut through that kind of thing and glean signs that maybe there's something which is underlying, which may have nothing to do with my deadline or this deliverable, but there's something else that's going on
yeah,
there.
I have one point to add to what you just said. So one of the very recent things that I had to communicate to one of the CXOs of a company I'm working with. So they So they're very open to this idea of mental health, and they're very inclusive of their employees, taking breaks when they need it. If you're not feeling good today, take off, it's okay, you can come tomorrow, right? If you're dealing with a family issue, it's fine, take off today. There's like a no strict leave policy as such. If you're not feeling good, don't come, it's okay. But on the other hand, the employees are getting emails in the middle of the night or early in the morning, right? Way before, like the first thing you wake up and you see 4 a.m. an email has come from the CXO, and you're like, okay. So as on one hand, the CXO is communicating to the employees that, hey, like, do your thing, take your breaks. I'm totally okay with that. But on the other hand, the CXO is overworking, right? So what kind of precedence will that set on your employees, and how comfortable are employees or team members following that? um, so is it just a statement you make that you're inclusive, or do you actually believe in it, because your actions are not in
Yeah, I'm
sync
not
with what
supporting
you're
what you're. Yes.
exactly. So this is a common trend that I have observed within startups, while they're very open, because a lot of startup founders are young, right? They're
Yes.
in their 30s, or early 30s, mid 30s, 40s, and they're overworked and overburdened, but they're not taking the break that they need.
I think the two things there, right? I mean, the good news, right? Silver lining is that definitely there's been an evolution in the sensibilities of leaders across the board, right?
Absolutely.
There are
Yeah.
sensibilities, sensitivities, being more empathetic, right? I don't want to play a semantic game here, but you know what I mean. But I think the challenge is understanding that and then being able to implement that, being able to
Exactly.
institutionalize that as policy and demonstrating that this is our policy, this is our culture, this is what we believe in, this is who we are. I think that is the gap that many companies are facing. Hopefully, a gap that will be bridged fairly shortly. Um, I wanted to, because we've been talking about the the absolute pressing need for mental health focus in the workplace, and I was wondering, Vinay, we could start with you, and then we go to Meghna. The same question is: what does it mean about the way that leaders and certain departments, traditionally this has been the purview of HR groups, where HR has been recruiting, and they've been promoting, and they've been rewarding, and they've been transferring or doing rotational training, primarily on the basis of domain expertise, on technical expertise, educational qualifications, and so forth, right? Is it now time for them to include the evaluation of behavioral competencies as well? Not from any punitive intention, but in the sense of, maybe raising the bar or helping people, or maybe calibrating job roles to people's strengths, as opposed to, okay, this is a JD, you are a body, you've now filled into this particular slot in the assembly line, right? So
Yeah, um, absolutely right, Avik. But I must say that this isn't something that is new to the world, right? Except that it has been supported and in some way enhanced by the scientific tools that we now have our hands on, right? I mean, if we look back at something which was kind of working towards the match of the person with the job, is something as old as 100 years back. Let's also sort of remember that even within our country, when we talk about specific jobs, maybe the organizations came in a little later to implement some of these principles. But when we talk about the armed forces, we look at the Navy and the Air Force and the Army, they would lay a lot of emphasis on the right personality of people to be getting into these jobs, right? So for some, as my students also tell me, that it's probably simpler to clear the written part of that examination, talking about an NDA or a combined defense services recruitment, but it would be far more difficult to clear the psychological tests, right? Because they would have these indirect ways of measuring behavior, what in psychology we study as those projective techniques. So talking about measurements in psychology or psychometrics, we're largely talking about a science that basically measures people's capabilities and the mental processes. And the objectivity with which it is done is something that refines the selection process, the recruitment process of people into different organizations. Let me give you an example here that, of course, the interview hasn't gone defunct at all. I mean, there are these inherent advantages here. But then, if you would look at an industry like hospital industry or maybe hospitality industry, you'd probably look at people from these caring professions to have greater empathy and greater patience. Now, how do you really end up measuring it in an interview sort of a thing? Right. And that's where some of these tools come in extremely handy. So, when we talk about psychometrics, we are basically talking about using a thoroughly sort of rigorous mathematical procedures to actually develop a test, right? It's not like one of those tests that appear in magazines or in newspapers, which have four alternatives. You tick one and it has no mention of whose test is it, and is it really standardized, does it have norms, does it have a reliability coefficient or a validity one, and therefore they're not very dependable. But then the world is moving towards developing tests that are far more reliable, that can probably pinpoint and target at specific traits that an organization might be looking for. So largely they would be from two domains, the cognitive as well as the personality domain. The cognitive aspects would be more related to the skill set that the individual might possess, and the personality would be more related to those dispositional attributes that an individual might have. Put them together and you come out with a test which can, in a short time span, do understand that the time that one really spends to fill up a test which is standardized is far less as compared to going about judging the same attribute from another traditional mode of recruitment. So here's where we find the immense use of psychometrics, and therefore it's no wonder that even in psychology programs, taught at college level and graduation, post-graduation, and actually even at the 11th and 12th class level, all that is likely to change in a while. But they do emphasize on several vocational aptitude related issues. They talk about many things that are quantifiable, measurable, and therefore would find themselves in a better position to direct people into the right professions. And that's where I believe that some of these psychometric tests, as I said, not only just save time, but also end up helping the organizations recruit the right person, train the right person, and at times even promote the right person. So I see huge advantages of measurement in psychology being applied to the industry, and I think it will only grow with time as we go along.
And Vinay, what you just articulated is music to my ears, because as both of you know, and Shubhajit, you as well, that my startup is in the mental health space and is actually in the business of evaluating individuals, professionals on behavioral competencies. In fact, a couple of our clients have started to use our assessments specifically for the purpose of recruitment. So what they're saying is we are not using it in order to screen out or weed out people, but we want to get the right talent on board. We want to make sure that if we are in media and publicity and in promotion and branding, advertising, that's our sector, then we need people who, more than very deep analytical abilities and problem solving abilities, we need people with higher sense of social intelligence, love of learning, teamwork, imagination, maybe sense of aesthetics if you're designing, ad campaigns and products and so on and so forth. So that is actually helping them, select the right candidates, which is very heartening. We've coming towards the end of our program, but Meghna, your views on this, and then we'll have the last set of questions.
Yeah, I would like to play the devil's advocate and kind of give you the other side of psychometrics. While I agree with both your points, here are some of the balancing notion on psychometrics that we need to view before we kind of go off into thinking of this as a foolproof way of hiring the right talent, right? So psychometrics, and I worked in a psychometric assessment company myself. I was in the research and development team, and so I know how these are designed and how these function. So with my experience, what I can say is the understanding of psychometrics we have as used in workplace and HR today is based on personality tests, right, and aptitude tests, maybe emotional intelligence tests, right, and what we have done is, how we do this is we take samples of like maybe a few 100,000 people in organizations, design tests, and come up with like maybe like 10 components or 10 personality traits that we think will make good leaders or good managers or good team members, good employees, right, based on specific skill sets that we require in an organization. What we fail to understand is people who do not have these specific personality traits can still be good at those jobs. What psychometrics fail to do is try to understand how we can make the best of a person's existing traits and skill sets, shine in a particular organization. Right. So I think psychometrics, while they really help you pick certain people with the specific traits you're looking for, you're probably missing out on really good people who may not on the surface possess these traits, but they can probably use their existing traits in a much better way. Right, so that is my 2 cents about being the devil's advocate on psychometrics. So how we can think about it is, while we can use psychometrics the way they are, will have to think about behavioral components that we can put to see if there are additional strengths to this individual that we can utilize for the growth of the organization, beyond personality traits. Let's say, for example, a person who we want to be a leader. One of the personality traits we want them to have is maybe extroversion, right? So someone who comes low on extroversion and higher on introversion, we believe may not make a good leader because there's a lot of interaction on the team, and introverts may not like that amount of social interaction. So what if a founder of a company is an introvert? So how will this person run a whole company? And there are a lot of introverts running companies today, right? So we just need to be open-minded enough and kind of restructure psychometrics in a way that will address these components.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'll give you my tuppence of rejoinder to your 2 cents. So the challenge, as I see it, I'm sort of doing a broad brush without getting into names, which wouldn't be right in any case, is that we traditionally psychometrics, and Vinay correctly pointed out that some of these go back eight decades or 100 years, right? They seem to draw a boundary. This is a manager, A, B, C, D, E. This is a leader, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? The entire concept of what constitutes a successful and able manager is changing as we speak. What constitutes an effective leader, we are no longer in Drucker's world, right? We have evolved. We have gone way beyond that. So I think the need of the hour is a psychometric model or sets of psychometrics which does not box in people, but instead gives you a range saying, look, these are 50 attributes, and depending on the context, depending on the situation, depending on the domain, depending on who you are, because if you're a thought leader and you're just sitting inside your room and you have all the access to all the databases and resources in the world, and you're doing research and you're coming up with something which is going to lead to a patent, an international or global patent, that is leadership per se, right? And you absolutely do not have to be an extrovert for that. I'm just drawing an analogy from your example. If there is something that does not box or hem people into these labels, and I'm not going to use the typical indicators, etc., that our psychometric measures have, but to generally say, look, these are 50 attributes. Where do you stand with respect to this? And depending on the situation at any point of time, something may be more relevant to me, something else might be more relevant to another leader, and that does not make that other leader any more or less than me, I guess. Yeah. This has been truly engrossing, and I'm learning and constantly enriching myself as we speak. We'll come to the last question around this, and Vinay, I'd like to take you back to something that you mentioned when you're talking about the collaboration or participation of academia and researchers and professors with the industry, and you talked about a specific example where they've got a mental hub, right? Purely in terms of what the pandemic has shown us, and I'm going to speak anecdotally. I know a very large number of organizations today have the EAP or the Employee Assistance Program in place, and in a 2019 scenario, that was unheard of. They'd say, EAP, what? I'm sure in Bangalore, I'll say, I understand what SAP means. I don't know what EAP means, right? I'm being flippant, but you know what I mean. My question is, how effective are these EAP programs? Because when I've, and I'm again speaking anecdotally, when I've spoken to a few of the CXOs, just having conversations with them, they would say, we've got an EAP in place now. I'm like, great. How many people are availing it? How am I desensitizing, this entire stigma and, the entire anonymity of an EAP program is great. How do I make sure that people find it safe? People find it completely kosher to come out and avail that EAP program. Otherwise, the program's there, the facility is there, the availability is there, and you're not making use of it, so you're not solving the problem. So I just wanted to sort of put some of those sort of diffuse thoughts out there and sort of ask you to respond to that.
Yes, Avik, I believe that the responsibility of providing mental health facilities really should not be centered around just a few behavior professionals, right? We are too few in number, and we really cannot take care of the kind of people who have different types of psychological disorders, right? So what really becomes extremely important is that some of these things, and whether it be a mental health hub or whether it be the employee related programs or other such, wellness consultants that the organizations are now recruiting for a while now, I believe come in very handy to help people deal with situations which might be work related. Let me also tell you that at least with one organization that I work with, it's not just the employee, it's actually the employee's family that can also avail the facilities that a psychologist would offer. I was pleasantly surprised when I was told that even the parents and the in-laws would be sort of included into it. And because, there are these families living with parents, or at times, the wife had moved on to her parents' place, and they can also be included into, let's say, a marital related problem. Right. So I see that as a very potent step towards helping people around in organizations. And let me tell you that as research is progressing in psychology, there are indicators that some of these things might be of great help. I mean, talk about the ICD-11, I mean, the international classification of disorders that we have. It's a WHO publication, which classifies, symptoms and the disorders that people might have. They've included burnout as one of the occupational phenomena, right? It would not be long before several such things also get included into the classification, whether it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 6, which might just come in at any point of time now. And what my fear is that, uh, the young people have got it the hardest, right? And therefore, those things that had to be really learned at school, at college, is something that they've been, very sorely deprived of, right? And we see that in our students. I mean, the kind of online classes, I mean, whether they are there or not, you ask them a question and they would really not respond. They might not be there at all. So some of these things really are likely to result in a certain set of changes in behavior which really need to be assessed. So I guess some of these programs come in extremely handy, be it in the form of simple skills like assertiveness skills or mindfulness, as I was mentioning, something that has been happening for a long time, even addiction related issues, the one-on-one coaching aspects, even the biannual retreats of some sorts come in very handy. And to conduct these stress audits that we have would get people to understand what exactly is the situation, right? I mean, one of those hardest things that people have while they meet up with a psychologist is to put their finger on something and say, well, here's where the problem is, right? And some of these programs would just help people identify, I mean, to actually be aware of where the problem emanates from, is extremely important. I mean, is it a familial issue that kind of rolls over to the place of work or the other way around, right? So I guess that, the psychologists or the behavior professionals, while they work in organizations, would help not only to, in some ways deal with the disruptions that keep happening at a behavioral level in organizations, but would also arrest some of these, much talked about psychological issues like anxiety and depression and burnout and things of that particular kind. So I can only see them as beautiful add-ons to the work world that is now emerging as the pandemic hopefully is declining.
Indeed. Meghna, your thoughts on the same?
Yeah. I think EAPs are a good start to kind of make mental health as a more inclusive part of any place where humans exist, right? Whether it's workplace, anywhere. Um, Keeping that in mind, I personally view the way EAPs are structured to be a bit limiting, uh, simply because I think the first thing we need to address is awareness, and I think Dr. Vinay brought it up. When employees go to psychologists, they're not able to pinpoint what the issue is or what they're dealing with. Uh, that is not happening because there's no awareness of what does mental health issue look like, right? So I think one of the things that any large any organization should include is awareness programs, right? So it could mental health concerns could be as simple as you're not able to sleep properly, or you're not able to eat properly, you're not able to handle work related stress or manage time properly, to something larger, as dealing with a mental health disorder or an issue itself, like depression, anxiety. So the first step, according to me, to engage in fruitful employee assistance programs is to bring about this awareness that mental health issue doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering problem, right? Something very simple can also be addressed. And it's like an ant's weight is an ant's weight and an elephant's weight is an elephant's weight, right? So we cannot discriminate between people's issues saying your issue is bigger than mine, right? I think EAP should include normalizing accepting problems and normalizing seeking help and giving an understanding of absolutely anything being a reason to seek help. It doesn't have to be specific things. We don't have to box these issues and label these issues as anything. It could be anything that you find difficult at that point in time, right? I think that would help streamline organizations into what kind of EAPs they want to give their employees, right? Because right now, what I see around is everyone's giving stress management programs and assertiveness training and resilience training, right? That these broad terms that everyone's giving. But are they asking the organization the question, what problem are you dealing with? Like, sure, I'll give you a solution, but like, I don't even know what your problem is, right?
Yes.
So I
Yes.
think we need, before diagnosing and giving the solution, we need to understand what is happening. And I think that will take EAPs a long way in being successful.
Right. I think that's brilliant. I think you just hit the nail on the head, right? Awareness is so crucial. I mean, I don't know what I don't know. I mean, typically conversations that happen in the workplace, and you and I have also had a couple of these, right? How is it going? Oh, I'm having a manic week. And then you say, ah, I see. And then I'm like, oh, I'm feeling tired. And then you just going it in stretches. You've got to remain with me to carry that conversation forward. So going from this is a manic week to I'm getting tired to I think I'm getting burnt out. Or I wouldn't even say that I think I need a breather. Let me really have a weekend of this today, this time round, and not do any work. Right? I think the language, and I think part of the challenge is lack of awareness, and a big part of the challenge is cultural. Because when I say it's hectic, it's manic, it's all a camouflage. It's really an euphemism for the fact saying I can't take my workload anymore, except that I'm not equipped to say it in those words, and I don't think it's kosher to say it in those words. And I think awareness programs you talked about, right, is going to move the needle very, very sharply in that direction, saying, can we speak our mind? Do we know our mind, A, and then can we speak it? Do we have a safe, transparent space of candor, of empathy in the workplace where we can actually start to speak our minds, right? Wonderful. We've gone over the hour, and I don't know how this time passed. This is so great.
It was a good listening to you. One question we were discussing last week about this, that while people are taking sick leave for health problems, so for mental problems, when does one take a leave and take 2 3 days leave? If there is anything in the HR manual we can work out, and how this direction can be taken up? Is it building the awareness in the organization, or how does one each comment from each of you? Abhik, you can also comment on this.
Uh, Vinay, Meghna, just go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we probably really need to look at it from a perspective of, some of the lessons that we have learned or ought to have learned from, the recent pandemic, because, that's changing the work world. Let me tell you that, I come from a place like Bhopal, where I was a witness of, or rather, a victim of the Bhopal gas tragedy, right? So it was horrifying, to say the least. I was a student at that particular point of time, and we actually thought that it was a nuclear attack. Because, being born up and brought up in this city, I had no idea that there was a Union Carbide plant that was manufacturing something that could be so deadly to this city. So I've had a glimpse of what a calamity of this kind could really mean, and I've realized how careful the government and the NGO sector had become about granting permissions to organizations or to industries manufacturing products that might be hazardous for human beings. So similarly, I believe that while people work on the HR policies in industries, there are a few things that I think I have learned as a lesson. Maybe people might have similar opinions, and one of those things is prioritizing relationships. right? We have really, we were always complaining that we never had time with children, or they would never spend time with us. Now they were there, right? Did we really use it the way we wanted to, or we thought we should, right? Also, the importance of health, right? So this is an extremely valuable lesson that we need to learn about investing wisely into health, be it mental or physical. Also, that these lessons about this excessive dependence on social media, and to understand that it exaggerates in ways where we wouldn't even know it to be coming from a source that's not reliable enough. And one very important thing that I believe needs to be incorporated is that we probably needed to slow down. You're talking about a manic week, as an example, Avik, and I hear that all too often. And believe me, it's not only in the industries and some of these sectors which are high risk, like or it really require those extended work hours, like banking and life insurance, but also in educational settings. I mean, the kind of work that I was doing several years ago and what I'm doing now is so different that I just have to have a different set of skill sets to keep pace with them. Also, that saving for the rainy day is one thing. That's another lesson I believe this generation, which has just entered the work arena, really needs to learn. Right. So this is one of those things which came to the surface while you had a COVID patient and you didn't know where to arrange the finances for. And also the fact that our lives really depend on people who work for us becomes very important. It's not only our domestic helpers, but I think it really percolates to the work world also, that the employees really need to be dealt with sensitively and in ways that are more humane than what it was prior to the pandemic. And of course, the final thing, the emphasis on mental health. The fact that we read about how people are getting impacted, and how there are these difficulties that they're facing, which are of a mental kind, while they go through a death in the family, or maybe while they expect a neighbor to come and help and the neighbor is nowhere to be seen, or they won't take calls, and how social distancing has impacted us. So I'm so glad that what we had always thought of has actually come about in a way, obviously not at the right time, in the sense that, I mean, the pandemic shouldn't have happened for the emphasis on mental health to have taken place. But well, here's where how the focus, the spotlight has actually shifted on to mental health, which I believe is going to benefit people in the long run.
Wonderful. Meghna,
Yeah.
could you?
Yeah, so I'm going to just answer your question, Shubhajit, in terms of HR policies and how we can work around them, right? I think a very simplistic way, but a very common sense way for me as a mental health professional would be not discriminating or differentiating between mental health and physical health and just calling it health, because it's an integral part. Like your mind and your body go together. It's one, it's you as a whole, right? It's not, we don't treat it in parts, we treat it as a whole. So why don't HR policies call it health and include it as physical or mental? It doesn't matter, as long as it's got to do with your existence and your body and your mind, whatever. A very simplistic, straightforward approach would be including everything under the construct of health. So I think that's how I would find a solution to this.
Wonderful. This has been so engrossing. I think, Shubhajit, we'll take this offline, but we do definitely have to do another round of this, another edition of this sometime, because while the pandemic is on the wane, the focus on mental health should remain, and in fact should increase as our maturity and our awareness of mental health evolves over time. Wonderful. Thank you, Vinay, Meghna, so much for being with us. And it's a great honor and privilege for me in a small way to work with Shubhojit and the NASCOM team to bring this program about. And viewers, I hope you enjoyed the session and hopefully we'll have more. Thank you and good
Thank you
night.
so much.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.